But I am kind of getting back to my roots. And today we are talking about a very important aspect of the design process. So yesterday we had a couple of different talks about about research, how AI is affecting the way we do research, but also how we kind of need to be a little bit more cognizant about what we believe, whether it's reading it online or through AIs. But today I want to step a little bit away from the AI conversation and instead to talk about a subject that is going to be impacted as a result of AI. We know that AI helps us build things a lot faster, and what that means is our rate of development is going to have to shift significantly. And so I would like to talk to you about a tool that we can use as designers and actually as product people in general, to be able to um, not only operate more in a more agile way, but to do so in a way that our stakeholders can actually make use of. And we had a couple of great talks yesterday about sort of the mindset shifts we might need to make to be more pragmatic about not only the way we do research, but how we actually communicate it. And Tanea did such a great job of kind of illustrating that. And I almost wanted to build on top of that idea. But before I get into those details, I want to share a little bit of a story. And this was the very first time that I did any kind of customer discovery work. Before this, I worked before working at ABSA, I was in an advertising agency, and there it's really like the client makes all the rules. And so working at ABSA was the first time I kind of got to do that deep sort of discovery research. And I was working with a great friend of mine who graced the UX South Africa stage last year, Stephanie De Beer. And so together we were working on this research project to get a better sense in South Africa how people manage their finances so that we could better inform the roadmap for the savings and investments business at ABSA. So we spoke to 29 participants. Each session was about 60 minutes. The participants were between the ages of 18 to 50. So it was super, super rich. I mean, if you kind of simply just calculate the time that we spent with participants, that was over a working week of just talking to participants without any of this synthesis presenting back to stakeholders and so on. And we came out of that, among many, with three main insights. The first was around using behavior to segment the audience or the user base, because this is one of the things that we really like. Any sort of key design platform or team is really looking for behavioral based mechanisms or indicators to segment their market. And we identified that you could almost break up, when it comes to personal financial management, the entire population into three categories: the dependents, the independents, and the providers. And you can, based on how people are sort of spending money and managing their finances, you can put them into those three categories. We also found that for the majority of people, being able to track their expenses is much more important than being able to plan, because tracking expenses helps you improve retrospectively, while planning to a degree is just kind of guessing into the future. And finally, one of the really, really interesting pieces of insight that we discovered when speaking to these different people was the fact that at first, when we kind of gave basic hints on how to save better, at first the customers were like, oh, like, how do you know this information? How do I know that I can trust it? Are you actually trying to help me, or are you just trying to get me to spend more? But with a very simple tweak, instead of simply telling you how to improve, tell you that 4 out of 5 people, let's say, save 400 Rand a month, immediately the apprehension went away and the competitive spirit started to kick in. And so we felt really good about this research that we were doing. We were like, surely we're going to be able to build a groundbreaking offering based on some of these insights. And yeah, unfortunately, that research went where a lot of research goes to die, into the void of a presentation deck that actually doesn't go anywhere. And for a long time, I was absolutely flabbergasted, because I was sure that the research was going to completely change the direction of the savings and investment business. I mean, they spent almost a month of just like two pretty experienced designers' time just getting these insights, and it went nowhere. And even after I'd moved to my next job, I was always asking myself this question: is like, how can we spend so much time trying to get the answers, and then go on to ignore them? And that is the question I hope to try to answer today. First, why does research disappear into slide decks and go no further? Second, what separates the research that is actually actionable from the research that doesn't go anywhere? Third, how do roadmaps actually affect whether research can land with our stakeholders? And finally, where does UX research actually fit into the whole discovery picture? And so the way that I want to do that is first by talking about an example of one of the first times where I saw research really, really working. And that was when one of the projects that I worked on here at Yoko, where I work during the day. So to sort of illustrate this, I would like to put all of you into the shoes of my stakeholder. So you're going to imagine that you are the head of product at Yoko right now, and there is a business problem that you are responsible for. At Yoko, there seems to be a churn problem, right? And I'll give you a little bit more insights around this. So, as you know, Yoko makes card machines and they process transactions. And there are two ways that you can use a Yoko card machine. You can sell with product, so you kind of put your product catalog on the machine, you ring the items up, and the person pays. Or you can use simple selling, where you simply enter an amount and check out. And what we found is that when merchants are using the product catalog, they're much more likely to stick with us. They're much more likely to sort of remain with us, thus sort of tackling or addressing the churn issue, which means that if we can get people to use products, we will address this churn issue. All right. I hope you're on the same page so far, because there is a poll coming up that you're going to have to answer to see how many of you are ready to take on the head of product role. So two of your team members now come to you. The one is the head of UX research, and he has this dashing presentation about customer research that they've been doing to get a deeper sense of how merchants are using the product catalog. And he is convinced that the primary problem is the fact that creating a product catalog is really difficult. But then on the other side, your customer support lead, who spends time with customers every day on an ongoing basis, is telling you, no, what we really need to do and where we need to spend our time is to sit with the product team, and instead of building a feature, they should be helping us create a customer support guide so that my team can help merchants better use products and also create products in partnership with them. And so my question is, if you were the head of product and you could only choose one, which would you choose? And I think I spelled choose wrong there, but whatever. And I will keep my eye on the poll to see how we're doing. Okay, so I see we've got 10 people who think that the customer support guide is the way to go. A couple of others, we have 2 people who trusting in the head of UX research. Well, unfortunately, the truth about being a stakeholder is it is never that easy. If you answered that question at all, you were wrong. And this is the situation our stakeholders continually find themselves in, and why so often they ignore the research that we do. Because, oh, did I go one ahead? Because this is the truth of the matter is, it is a false dichotomy to believe that one is right and the other is wrong. So the thing that you're seeing in front of you right now is the result of all the research that we did on the project we're going to be talking that I'm going to be talking a little bit further about. And those 2 options that I showed you are only 2 of 18 different solutions we could have done to solve the problem. And what happens so often is that in the back of our minds, our stakeholders know vaguely that they've got all of these options. And these 2 people are just giving them a small slice of the picture, which they have justified based on their interpretation of the research. But they haven't considered how much capacity the teams have, whether the customer research team actually has enough staff. They have not considered whether even building a solution is the right way to go. And so immediately, our stakeholders have got the sense at the back of our mind that they don't have the full picture, and to just listen to this research wouldn't actually be doing the right thing. Well, this then begs the question, what should they be doing? And so I'd like to introduce to you one of the godmothers of continuous discovery in the tech space, Teresa Torres, who wrote the book Continuous Discovery Habits. And in it, she introduced this idea of the opportunity solution tree. That's a diagram that you just saw at the above there. This diagram is a game changer for anyone in the research space, because what it does in its fundamental truth is that it overlays research findings onto stakeholder decisions. And the way it does that is by breaking things down into a couple of different layers. The first layer is first identifying a desired outcome, let's say improving the product catalog usage. It then maps out to the opportunity space. Now, as designers, we're a little bit more familiar with this idea of the problem space. But the issue with this idea of the problem space is it focuses entirely on the user and not at all on the business. The idea of an opportunity space instead frames the user problems as opportunities for the business to generate value, and which effectively results in profit. The layer underneath that is your solution space. And then only at the bottom do you have your experiments where you're actually practicing continuous discovery. And so I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how to go about going from the very top of this tree, how we work with our stakeholders, all the way to the bottom where we can actually practice continuous discovery. And you'll see if you kind of look at the image that I was showing you there and the diagram that we have on the right, these are essentially representations of each other. And I'm going to be using this diagram as I go to keep into context what we're talking about. So the next question I want us to really think about, and one of the places we have to start if we are going to make our research not only useful, but valuable, is how do roadmaps actually affect the research that we're going to do, and whether or not that research can actually land. And I'd like to reference a quote from a French writer whose name I am not even going to try to pronounce. But he said, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up men and women to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. And this is the perspective which we need to encourage in our stakeholders and business partners, is that their job is not to tell us what to build, but instead to set the direction. What are we as an organization trying to achieve? Because at the moment, a lot of organizations, either on a quarterly basis or on a yearly basis, either make a roadmap or a book of work or whatever you want to call it. But effectively, they have a list of features that they are telling you to build. And that's sort of like these organizations at the bottom, the ones who are focusing on a specific output that they want to achieve, which results in a roadmap or something to that effect. And if we look at it in the context of our opportunity solution tree, they're setting goals at the level of the solution, instead of setting outcomes that they want to achieve and leaving it up to our product teams to decide how to get there through experimentation and evidence. And so I want to talk a little bit about what the difference is between organizations that set goals based on outcomes and organizations that set goals based on outputs. And I'll first start with the outputs, the way we typically tend to set goals today. So somebody will come to the stakeholder, whether it's in a presentation, whether it's an insight from an agency or a customer that has been complaining too much, and they'll tell them about their problem, and that thing will go onto the book of work. Now, sometimes it's a little bit more elaborate, but effectively somebody convinces them to put a feature onto the roadmap. And they will say, these features we're doing, these features we're not doing. Now, what is the problem with doing this? If we put this in the context of the opportunity solution tree, if our roadmap is based on outcomes, it means that we are assuming that everything above it is already confirmed. We're assuming that the objective we're trying to achieve is right. We're assuming that the opportunities that we're going for are the opportunities that are going to provide the most value, and that the solutions that we put on our roadmap are the right solutions. Now, at the beginning of the quarter, this looks reasonable. This feature looks great. Customers have been asking for it. It's going to go perfectly. Or so we believe. So here is an example of a real experiment which came as a result of the opportunity solution tree that we had. Customer support told us about the fact that if we were to empower them, they would be able to do more for the product catalog creation process. So the experiment we would run is to create a step-by-step cheat sheet that walks through the process of creating a product, editing pricing, kind of going through that entire process. And then we do a simple split test. One group has the step-by-step process, the other one doesn't. See how much that allows people to pick up the product catalog feature, right? Now, here's the problem with setting a roadmap based on features. Let's say the feedback comes back and it turns out that even our customer support team struggles, even with a step-by-step guide, to create a product. Now, the experiment that we just ran at this bottom level has let us know that not only is the solution we're trying to build incorrect, maybe it is not a good investment in terms of our time, specifically from an opportunity perspective. Maybe the opportunity of improving how good our customer support team is at product catalog creation isn't worth it. And it kind of makes the entire roadmap, which you have committed to for a quarter or for an entire year, up for question. You either now have to listen to the results of your research, or you have to kind of just close your eyes to it and continue on your roadmap. Now, what actually happens as a result of that? It means that now the person who is doing this experiment has to convince their manager or their design lead or whoever they report to that the roadmap needs to be revised. That's one meeting. Then that person in leadership has to go to the broader group that they belong to and convince the entire group that actually the opportunity they're targeting isn't the right opportunity. And then it pulls into question the overall objective which they started from. And that's 4 meetings that didn't need to happen. And especially when you consider the fact that these are executive meetings, these can happen over a week, 2 weeks. And that's time where your product team is kind of just stalling and twiddling their thumbs. And this is the problem with having features on a roadmap rather than desired outcomes. Because only after they've gone through all of those meetings can they set a new direction, choose a different opportunity, and maybe explore a different solution, which also then requires the roadmap to be updated and then be represented. Now, if you're trying to be agile and if you're trying to operate in an age where prototyping is faster than these kinds of meetings and decisions, it is impossible to operate like that. You see, the organizations that take an outcome focus understand that the leadership's responsibility is to select the end goal, the direction that the company is trying to go into. And it is the product team's responsibility to run experiments to determine what the best way to achieve those opportunities might be. So what actually happens when we're outcome focused? How do the events actually change? Well, if you do an experiment and you're outcome focused, and the only thing that your leadership team is holding you accountable for is increasing the product catalog usage, it doesn't matter if an experiment goes wrong because you just move on to the next experiment. You don't need to go back and have meetings and justify why this feature is no longer on the roadmap and a different feature needs to be on the roadmap. Instead, the product team simply starts the next sprint, chooses the next experiment, and continues going. And that, at its essence, is what this continuous discovery is about. Having skills complete teams that can test ideas and change priority of their own accord without having to go up the chain of command. Now, you'll still need to communicate progress, but you won't have to keep convincing stakeholders that different things need to be done. So there isn't that cost of invalidating that requires continuous organizational alignment. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about how to convince either to set outcome-based goals or to convince your stakeholders to set outcome-based goals, there are 2 great books about this. On the one hand, there is Measure What Matters, which is probably the seminal book on OKRs, Objectives and Key Results. This one is a little bit more academic, a little bit more theoretical, talks about how the concepts work together. And then there is a book called Radical Focus by Christina Wadke. I hope I'm saying her name right. And this one is a little bit more narrative. It kind of follows a business that is kind of transforming from typical roadmap to objectives and key results. These 2 books are really, really effective if you want to start this process before kind of getting into the actual continuous discovery activities. So if we have got an outcome, what happens next? Once our leadership team has given us a desired outcome that they want us to achieve, what role does user research actually play in this process? How do we stack the organization's objectives on top of the research that we are going to find? And I'll walk you through how we did this in my project at Yoko. So we had this specific desired outcome to increase product catalog usage. Now, the numbers here are not actually representative, but they kind of give you a sense of the direction. And so how do we actually identify the different options we have in this opportunity space? Well, we do what designers do best. We go and talk to our users. So we went out, we chatted to a whole bunch of merchants, and we asked them about this outcome. We know we want people to use a product catalog. So we're going to talk to as many people as we can as to where they're struggling, what are the things that are happening that are preventing them from moving forward, and preventing them from using the product catalog in their business and in their selling process. Sorry, duplicate slide. So effectively, when we spoke to them, the thing that we eventually found out is that there were four main areas and four main challenges that were preventing merchants from using the product catalog. One, they didn't know about it. There wasn't an educational intervention that let them understand how the product catalog is going to make the process of selling easier for them, which results in them making more money. The second is there were some who are kind of just reluctant. It's too much work. The classic procrastinators approach. And then there were some that were value misaligned. For some merchants, the aim is not to sell faster. Instead, selling slower is better, where you want to build a relationship, have a conversation with your customer about how their day has been going. And so then that person is simply not geared towards using your product catalog. And finally, there was an educational gap. For some of them, they knew about the product catalog, they wanted to use it, they wanted to be able to use it, but they just didn't know how exactly it worked. And based on these four categories, we now have got a way of framing our objective in the context of things we could achieve that are valuable for our customer that would result in business value. And that kind of makes the second layer of our opportunity solution tree. So we've now got a desired outcome, and we've got a couple of different opportunities to which we can tie some solutions. This then begs the next question. Once you've got your possible opportunities, how do you identify specific solutions? Now, it is tempting as designers, once you've kind of got a good sense of the problem space and the opportunities, to start wireframing or doing personas and kind of generating different ideas. Instead, what we need to do is bring together all of the resources that we have to look at the potential opportunities. The reason for that is because some opportunities will require you to design an interface, but others will be writing a document out for customer support. Others will be changing the way sales is approaching the way that they engage with customers. So you want as broad and as diverse a group of people to be able to engage with these opportunities to come up with a different set of solutions. And then what you get is all of the different options. Instead of just focusing on the two people who have the head of product ear, you get solutions from everybody in the organization. And you can now really plan experiments that not only test the different solutions, but that you can also consider the effort that it would take to both test and build that specific option. And this is how you construct an opportunity solution tree, by layering the objectives of the organization underneath the needs and opportunities that we could solve on behalf of our users, identifying multiple different ways of solving it based on the information we get from our product teams, and then planning specific experiments that we can test in a continuous fashion to be able to actually go through this process of continuous discovery. And what that lets us do is it lets us go down this tree week by week, sprint by sprint, without having to communicate up the line of command, and instead simply talk about how are we moving the metrics? Are we on track to achieve our goal? Or do we need to change our initial objective? And so, remember, if you want to take this on, there are only four things you need to do. One, you have to let go of roadmaps and instead focus on outcome-based goals. Then you must speak to your users. There's no way of going around that, so that you can map specific opportunities, specific user opportunities that will provide business value. Then you need to speak to experts, speak to people who have got specific skill sets in your organization that might be able to address the opportunities at hand. And then you do what designers do best, and you test your assumptions with prototypes, with interviews, with usability tests. And by doing that, you drastically decrease the product development process, but you also allow your stakeholders to make decisions based on the information that you're gathering. And that is what I've got for you today. Thank you.
Alfi, thank you so much for that insightful talk. I think it definitely resonated with me personally. And I can see there's lots of feedback as well. Um, some questions. Okay, I'm just going to prompt everyone. If you do have any questions, please add them to the Q&A section. But we have a question from Caleb. Um, he says, might be a bit premature now, but Alfie, how do we get the higher ups to also think in the perspective as opposed to what currently transpires? If you haven't already answered it.
How do we get ups to think in that perspective? Ah, yes. So there's a technique that you can use specifically because it is the one thing that I will say, which I maybe glossed over, is it is extremely uncomfortable for a stakeholder to not know what you are building because they are paying for that time where you're building and they don't know what you're going to do. And that is the primary reason why roadmaps have features rather than objectives. And so, what we can do is instead of telling them to just jump directly into this, is when they give us specific features to put onto the roadmap, what we should do in that conversation is link that feature to a desired outcome. So, if I just kind of scroll back to this, where is that slide? This one. So at the moment they're creating a roadmap at this level, right? They're telling us that at this yellow level, they're saying these are the features we need to build. What we need to do is say, okay, yes, that is the feature. How are we measuring the success of that feature so that we already start to get them to think in this outcome focused approach? So let's say they tell us what we need to do is build a new way, like an AI product catalog, right? Now, it is tempting to then just take that and go and start researching it. But instead, we should say, okay, how will we know that this AI product catalog is achieving our end goal? How are we measuring the success of this thing? So that they're, even though they're still creating the roadmap, they're starting to think that they start to see that simply delivering a feature isn't what they're trying to achieve. They're trying to move a metric using that feature. And so it is our job to make sure that they continually see that every time we talk about the progress of that feature, we also talk about the metric that it's supposed to be moving. And after a while, they will start to see that actually, maybe we don't have to build this feature. We could do this other thing that's way cheaper, will take much shorter, but will allow us to move our metric much more. Then they can slowly start to actually go through the process of evolving and taking this new approach to thinking about not only discovery, but placing effectively what is called product bets, betting on specific opportunities and the value that we seek or aim to get out of that. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Alfie. The next question is from Maru. You did it, Alfie. I'm all out of questions. So I'll leave you with a comment to compliment instead. Thank you for giving me a proper framework and key steps to help me complement what I have already been doing in an informal, Frankenstein way. This is a much better way to take stakeholders along for the journey. Um,
Thank
that's
you
a
so
quote.
much, Maru. Oh, you've been great throughout this conference.
Yeah, Maru's been up it. And then we've got another question from Danny Hosen. Um, how can we get big corporates to move away from the traditional roadmap structures?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've started to do. I mentioned it a little bit in Caleb's question, but I think another thing that is also important to do that for our stakeholders, and I think this is one of the mistakes that we make as designers, is thinking that the result of our research should be a presentation. The result of effective research is a better decision, which means we need to remember that what we are doing by doing research is not coming back with insights. The insights should be governing a decision, which means we have to always be framing the results of our research as information to inform a decision and making that clear for the stakeholders that we have at hand. And whether those stakeholders are the CEO or a board or an investor or your team lead, that person is responsible for a decision. And this is the thing we need to remember. They are the one who is going to have to go to the board and give sales numbers or go present to the CEO as to how the product is doing. And so we need to keep the work we're doing in their context so that when we talk about a user need, it is clear how that user need moves the original metric that they are responsible for. But this means we have to do the work before we start doing research. We have to do the work of understanding what is the metric they're responsible for moving. And then once we know that, then we can actually go and ask our users, what would it take for you to move that metric? What do we need to do to make you happy in order for that metric to move? So that our research isn't just generally asking people, do you like how this works or is it faster? We're actually measuring it by a business goal that our stakeholder is responsible for.
Thank you. We've got another question here from Tanea. What if our business doesn't share their objectives with us? I've been told to just make it the best website when I asked about strategy.
Um, so I think that the challenge very often there. So there are different. There can be different challenges. The truth is, as designers, myself included, the one thing we are guilty of is neglecting our business acumen. We don't know the language that business people use to talk about things. If you ask your stakeholder, what is the strategy for this website? Like, a strategy isn't a sentence that you can just, pull out of the air. You need to actually understand the terminology used to talk about this. So, for example, a different way of phrasing the question that you mentioned is, they tell you to build this website, and you're like, okay, cool. Maybe before we end this sales call, can you just give me a sense as like, if we build this website and it's absolutely successful, what would that success actually look like? What would we have changed for the context of your business? And then they'll say, maybe they're getting more sales, they're getting more leads, people are not confused about what the business does. Okay, then it's like, okay, what if we're getting more sales? Is there a specific target that we're trying to get? And effectively, so what I'm describing is illustrated in the book Radical Focus and Measure What Matters. It kind of gets into a lot more detail as to that, because the thing that we need is actually not the strategy. The thing that we need is the metric they are responsible for moving. Because when they're telling you to build a website, eventually at some stage they'll tell you what the primary or key call to action is. And that call to action, more often than not, will illustrate what the desired business outcome is. It'll either lead you to a purchase screen, it'll lead you to schedule a session, some kind of thing that results in a business outcome. And from that business outcome, you can actually extrapolate what their desired outcome is. And then that governs the research that you're going to be doing. Sometimes you'll go and do your research and you'll eventually find out that the objective that they set is wrong. That's a little bit less often, but it does happen sometimes, and then requires you to kind of go to the drawing board. But the important thing is you have now got a clear way of showing how the results of your research connect to the specific business metric they are responsible for, and the fact that that business metric isn't going to get them to where they want to go. Now, sometimes your client will just tell you, build me the website, I don't really care. And I mean, if people want to waste their money, I don't know if there's much you can do about that. But I hope that answers your question.
Sorry, I was fighting with the mic. That is the last of the questions. Thank you, Alfi. I don't think.